In 2012, I got a phone call from my mum early one morning to tell me that my dad was a bit poorly, um, and that he was in the hospital. But she told me he was fine. He'd just been a bit under the weather and that he was itching to come home. About half an hour later, she phoned me back to tell me that the hospital had called her and asked that she get to the hospital and bring the family. I lived probably about 150 miles away, so I gathered my essential things, just a few bits and pieces, jumped in the car and drove down. I'm not entirely sure why, but all the way there, I was convinced that it was just something and nothing, that he was going to be absolutely fine. I had very relaxed phone calls with friends of mine whilst driving down there, and it was fine. And I got to the hospital, pulled up in the car park, and I met my brother and my sister in the doorway. My sister was clutching a grey patient belongings bag, and she was holding onto that bag like it was a life vest stopping her from drowning. And I could tell instantly. I saw her face, I saw my brother's face, and I knew that my dad had just died. None of us expected him to die. He certainly wasn't poorly. Not like that. I walked into the room. There was a side room. My family were in there. And immediately, I just put on game face, business face. Right, what happened? Where is he? What do we need to do? The next few hours were a bit of a blur, but I know that I managed to speak to several people in the hospital and to organise things. I got all of my family members home. We sat in my mum's house. The next few months, my brother just started to drink a lot, to party a lot, just to do things all the time, just to constantly be busy. He was obviously running away from the fact that my dad had died. He was grieving hard and he didn't want to. My sister was very much that person who would grieve openly and intensely for every moment, for every second she didn't have him, and for every second she did have him, she grieved aggressively and openly. And my mum just tried to carry on and find a new normal, but found herself getting lost. And there I was in the middle. So I've got my brother and I was trying to keep him focused. My sister, I'm trying to hold her up onto her feet. And my mum was just lost. So I was trying to help her find a new way. And I was just busy. I left my job, I left my friends, I left everything 150 miles away, moved in to look after my disabled mum and to help with my grieving family. We were all grieving him. We all missed him. He is a huge, huge part of all of our lives. Over the course of the next couple of years, we all found our new normal. My sister began to cope a bit better. My brother certainly coped a bit better. My mum found her new normal and life just slowly went on. And about 5 years after he died, there were some other things happened in my life, and I think they brought back for me the sense of frustration and anger and bitterness and just the loss of control. I had no control, and all of these things that I felt like I should have been feeling when my dad initially died, when I should have been grieving him. And I punished myself for years because I didn't grieve properly. I didn't grieve him like he deserved to be grieved. I felt like I'd dishonoured him. And all of these things came rushing back about 5 or 6 years later. And those feelings of just complete loss and just heartache, it was overwhelming. And for me, that manifested in anxiety. I developed a huge lump in my throat, in my chest and my throat, and I would just have to speak his name. I'd just have to speak his name, and this lump would grow. It'd be a physical manifestation. I wouldn't be able to swallow. I wouldn't be able to speak. I would cough, I would gag sometimes. There were times when I'd look in the mirror, clawing at my neck, trying to see the lump because it was so real, it was there. My anger, I was so angry, so angry. I had such a short temper. If I got stressed at work, I wouldn't deal with that stress in a good way. I would be very aggressive. I would snap at people. And the tears, I just cried solidly because everything was wrong. Nothing felt right. And all of that was feeling incredibly frustrated with myself because the man had been dead 5 years. I should have been over it already. Nobody grieves for 5 years. I spoke to Susie. I reached out to her and I told her that I was struggling. And she suggested that I try hypnotherapy or some sort of therapy. So I looked and I found this lady. In fact, she was found for me. And I went to see her. And we sat there one day and she said to me, "Tell me what's going on." So I told her about all of these pressures I'd got in my life, just relationship pressures and work pressures and blah, blah, money pressures, all of this stuff. And it was just like relaying a shopping list to her. And then I mentioned my dad, and just at the mention of his name, I just dissolved. It was a mess, an absolute mess. And she said to me that we need to deal with that before we deal with anything else. Because that was the linchpin in her mind. That was what was holding all of these negative emotions for me. And she asked me to tell her the story. And I told her the story of how I got that phone call that morning and then my progress down the motorway to get to the hospital and how I learned that my father had died. Before I'd even got, I probably wasn't even in the car in that story going down, and the tears came and I couldn't breathe and the anxiety and the lump was there. And this woman physically came to me and she sat next to me and she said, "I'm going to touch you. Please continue to tell the story. Pay no attention to what I'm doing. I'm going to touch you." I'm looking at this woman thinking she's crazy. So I'm telling the story in absolute tears, and she just began to touch my head in various points on my head. And as I'm telling this story and I am breaking down, she said to me, "Right, I wanted to," as I got to the end, she said, "How do you feel?" I said, "I feel awful. I'm angry, I'm bitter, I'm frustrated, I'm sad." She said, "Put a number on it." I said, "Put a number on it." So I graded it. And she said, "Right, I'd like you to tell me the story again." So I started to tell the story again. And this time I got a little bit further into the story and the tears came. And again, this lady touched my face. Um, at the end, she said, "How do you feel?" And I told her. She said, "Grade it." And I can't remember the numbers, but say the first time I graded it, I was at a level 9 discomfort. This time it'd come down to a level 7 or 8. So she said, "Tell me the story again." This time, by now, I'm convinced this lady's actually lost the plot. So I told her the story again. And again, I started crying. But at this point, I'm now in the car park at the hospital before I started crying. And she's tapping. And we did this 3, 4, maybe 5 times. I can't remember. And on the last time, she said, "I'd like you to tell me the story again." And this time, I was able to go through the story from the beginning to the end without crying. I became aware that this choking mass wasn't there. And while I felt a bit uncomfortable, I think it was just the situation. When I graded it, I was at a 1 or a 2. It was very, very low. And I thought it was perhaps because I'd told this story in quick succession that this had happened. Maybe I just desensitized myself to it. But this lady explained to me the process that she'd done was called EFT, which I think was emotional freedom tapping. And she said, by telling my story or by feeling the emotions behind the story and tapping on certain points on your face and your head and your body, you're able to release the blockages that allow that emotion to pass through and out. I've never been really one for alternative or holistic therapies. Wasn't my bag. I've openly dismissed tree huggers, but I learned something that day. I learned that there's a lot of emotions and a lot of feelings pent up inside of people. And in me at that time, there's a lot of negative emotions and they were affecting my life. And with that woman's help, I learned a new skill, EFT, which I have used many times since to try and deal with some of those emotions and pass them through. Now, obviously, I still get upset when I think about my dad, but I can talk about him and I talk about him every day, and that'll never change. I love my dad and I miss my dad terribly, but I absolutely spend more time now celebrating at the time that we had with him and celebrating the joy that he brought to my life and the times it told me off. I don't feel that sense of anger and that sense of bitterness and betrayal and hurt anymore. I just feel love. And I certainly don't choke when I speak his name. And I think that was because of the EFT. And that's my story.